Welcome back, Farm Kids. Today we are going to read the tale of the Shoemaker and the Elves. Once there was a shoemaker who worked hard from morning to night. The shoes he made were of the finest leather, but business was slow. One night, he found he only had enough leather left for one more pair of shoes. With a heavy heart, he cut the leather carefully and left the pieces ready on his workbench to sew the next morning. He blew out the candle and crossed the yard from his little shop into the house. The next day, the shoemaker was up early as usual. When he pulled back the shutters in the shop, you can imagine his surprise when he saw not pieces of leather ready to sew on the bench, but a fine pair of ladies' shoes with delicate pointed toes. The stitching was so fine, you would think it had been done by mice. He put the shoes in the window of the shop, and before long, a rich merchant came in and bought the shoes for his new wife, paying the poor shoemaker double the usual price. The shoemaker was delighted at this turn in his fortunes, and bought enough leather to make 2 new pairs of shoes. Once again, he cut the leather and left the pieces on his workbench to sew the next day. The next day, the shoemaker was up even earlier than usual. His wife came with him as he went into the shop and pulled back the shutters. "Oh, husband," she gasped, for there on the bench stood 2 pairs of the finest shoes she had ever seen. There was a green pair with red heels, and a pair so shiny and black the shoemaker could see his face in them. He put the shoes in the window, and very quickly in came a poet who bought the green pair with red heels. And not far behind him, there was a parson who bought the shiny black pair. And both paid him a great deal of money for the splendid shoes with stitching so fine you would think it had been done by mice. This continued for many days. The shoemaker would buy new leather and leave the pieces cut ready on his bench at night. And when he came back in the morning, there would be the most exquisite shoes. The shoemaker's reputation spread, and his shop was soon full of customers. Before long, the shoemaker and his wife were no longer poor, but they still lived simply as they had little wish for luxuries of life. One day, the wife said, "Husband, I think we must see who has given us this good fortune so we may thank them." The shoemaker agreed. So that night, after laying out the cut leather pieces, he and his wife hid behind the door of the shop. As the town hall clock struck midnight, they heard scampering of tiny feet and little voices laughing. 2 elves slid out from behind the skirting board and climbed onto the bench, where they were soon hard at work, stitching away with tiny stitches that were so fine they might have been done by mice. The elves sang as they stitched. But oh, they looked poor. Their trousers were ragged, their shirts were threadbare, and their feet looked frozen as they had neither socks nor shoes. Soon the leather was gone, and on the bench stood more shoes. The elves slipped away. The next day, the shoemaker took some green and yellow leather and made 2 little pairs of boots, yellow with green heels. The wife took some cloth and made 2 little pairs of red trousers and 2 green jackets with silver buttons. She knitted 2 little pairs of socks. That night, they laid out the clothes and boots and hid behind the shop door. As the town hall clock struck midnight, the 2 elves slid out from behind the skirting board and climbed onto the bench. When they saw the gifts, they clapped their hands in delight, flung off their old rags, and tried on the new clothes and the boots. They looked splendid. Then they slipped behind the skirting board, and the shoemaker and his wife never saw them again. But once a year, when the shoemaker opened the shop in the morning, on his bench he would find a pair of shoes with stitching so fine you would think it had been done by mice. It's always important to show gratitude for all the great fortunes we have in our lives, just like the shoemaker and his wife did for the elves.